recording.
Great, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to Ignite Creativity, bringing lessons to life. I'm your host, Stephanie Palp-Stevenson. I'm project director for Reinvent the Classroom, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Rebecca Banks, Kristen Palazzolo, and Stanley Berry, also with Digital Promise. At Digital Promise, our mission is to accelerate innovation in education to improve opportunities for all learners. And that means closing the digital learning gap, not only in access, but also in participation and in powerful use. Digital Promise invests at the intersection of these stakeholder groups, educators, researchers, and developers, because we know that to realize technology's full potential, we must focus on amplifying human capacity. Educators need every possible tool and resource to engage, motivate, and personalize learning both with and for their students. Developers must be informed by education research and be supported by connections with practitioners so that they can design products that solve salient issues in education today. And researchers must evolve new methodologies that produce results in a way that matches the speed of technology. To accomplish these goals, we believe in the power of networks, the sharing of stories from the field, support and investment in research, and an engagement in lifelong learning. Our networks bring together education stakeholders in critical conversations about education equity and pedagogy. One of those networks is our Reinvent the Classroom program. In collaboration with HP and Microsoft, Digital Promise brings together educators from across the US and Canada in our HP Learning Studios, HP Spotlight Schools, and HP Teaching Fellows. The schools and educators in this network exemplify Digital Promise's principles of powerful learning. These principles are built upon decades of learning sciences research and guide educators to design learning experiences that engage the hearts and minds of learners. These learning experiences provide opportunities for students to engage deeply in their learning while using technology in ways that contributes to closing the digital learning gap. Powerful learning means that learning is personal and accessible, authentic and challenging, collaborative and connected, inquisitive and reflective. These sets of principles do not work in isolation, but are synergistic and mutually supportive. It's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Rebecca Banks. And just as a reminder, you may have heard at the beginning, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to Digital Promise's site for your future review. Rebecca?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce that this evening we'll hear from 4 great HP teaching fellows on how they ignite creativity inside their classroom and in their own professional growth. I would encourage all folks calling in tonight to say hello in the chat. And as you do, if you wouldn't mind dropping a word or two on what creativity in the classroom looks like to you. Our first panelist is Vicki Morgado. She teaches 6th through 8th grades and is an elementary guidance learning teacher in Mississauga, Ontario. Joining us also is Tina Hine, technology coach in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. Amanda Brace is joining us from Regina, Saskatchewan, and she's a student achievement coordinator. Finally, we'll say hello to Brent Christensen, who teaches 7th grade maths in Spokane, Washington. And the format of this evening is we're going to direct one of our questions to each of our panelists. They'll share a little bit about how they about their response, and then we'll ask the others to share as well. But again, for anybody calling in, please do feel free to join us in the chat or in the Q&A. Thank you. So my first question I'd like directly to Brent, and then ask the other panelists to weigh in. Brent, we noticed a lot of great examples that you shared with us of how you model creativity in the classroom, and it's clear that creativity is important to you. So why is creativity important in your classroom?
Well, creativity, to start off with, I got to define what is creativity, and it really changed how I viewed life once I had this definition, because my whole life I grew up thinking I'm not a very creative person. And my first year teaching, I tried to figure out how can I be more creative. And I came across this definition of creativity. It's the ability to find multiple pathways to the same solution. And once I came across this definition, I started to internalize, hey, I'm creative. I had this blur between artistry and creativity. I had them combined and I was able to separate them. I realized I was creative, and that changed my outlook on teaching and the classroom. And so one of my big things I try to do as a teacher is to encourage creativity, so that students aren't limiting themselves on what they can be or what they can do in their lives. And so as a math teacher, I'm really focused on giving students opportunities to not just follow the examples I'm giving in the classroom on how to do something, but encouraging them to create their own ways of doing things in the classroom and then sharing that out in the classroom. So it's not just one way that we are trying to solve this problem, but if I have a student that has a different way and it works, go for it. Try it out, keep going with it until you get stuck with it, and then let's figure out a new way to solve it. Like, for example, we're doing percents right now in the classroom, and I have, I think, 6 or 7 different methods that are being used in the classroom, and they all work. They work just fine. And their students are helping each other learn in their way in the ways that work for them. Because my method isn't necessarily going to work for every single student, and it's not going to make sense for every single student. But the way that Hayden explained it and her method works for Robert, great. I love it. Encouraging that creativity allows them to have that empowerment in their learning, as not only as they're learning, but then how they become teachers and educators themselves amongst their peers. So creativity it's how students learn. It takes the classroom from being this man's kind of dull place where it can be and adds life to it. So creativity is important because it's how we learn and grow, not just in the classroom, but then beyond.
Thanks, Brent. That was a really good example. And I think we had a lot of fun checking out the videos that you made. Amanda, you also
my hands
shared
alive. My students mentioned that, like,
yeah.
hey, Mr. Christensen, your hands are going all the time. I'm like, are you like Italian or something? I'm like, no, I just learn to communicate better when you can use your hands to motion pieces and have some fun with it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience as you, Brent. I did a lot of videos and content creation for students, which allowed me to use my creativity as well. So you probably noticed that you were able to get creative with what you were doing. I taught in an online school last year. So we did a lot of video creation and we would teach different strategies. We would put up the green screen and get into character. We'd teach reading strategies to grade 2 students. And that was their favorite part of the day. They loved looking forward to those exciting videos because it got them creative too, because they were able to look at it in a new way. And then as teachers, we were able to be creative as well.
If you even watched the video that they posted in the link, Amanda did a really great job. They can tell they're having fun making these videos, and I can see kids trying to be involved in some of these videos down the road as well. Just seeing them like, hey, what do you want to be in the background? And let's try to just have some fun with this and maybe share out what you're learning.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, those are awesome though. I love them.
Yeah, I think there's some really great modeling of creativity with both of the work that you've done. I'm going to shift my next question over to Vicki. So Vicki, when we first talked about your style, you mentioned addressing and overcoming students' limiting beliefs. And I thought that was I think that's something that a lot of us, even as adults, kind of struggle with in terms of, Brent mentioned this, like being a creative person, even though he doesn't necessarily consider himself an artist. I can imagine that working with middle schoolers, that's especially challenging. So how do you create the space for them and an environment that feels both safe and sparks creativity?
Yeah, so my role as an elementary guidance, the guidance piece, I do a lot of work on who am I and what are my opportunities? And I feel like creativity is perfect for expressing that. And I've worked with kindergartners all the way up to grade 8 and adults and some high school. And what I find is generally that as we get older, we tend to take less risks and we kind of pigeonhole ourselves sometimes and have these very limited beliefs. And so I'll often catch students who say, I'm not, or even adults, even some of the educators I work with say, I'm not a creative person. And I think Dean talked about this in the chat, that having that growth mindset is so important and modeling that for our students, but also catching ourselves when we have those. And so questioning students and say, well, what would lead you to believe that you're not creative? What does creativity mean to you? And having them and providing different avenues and different mediums for them to express themselves. So the top example in the picture is a project that I worked with called Who Am I? And basically it's the video, they have to create a 1-minute video. It's called Me in a Minute. And they have, you could do this with the podcast. I've done it with the podcast as well. But here we're making videos, and we do a lot of work on what are my different identities, my social identities, ethnicity, race, class, etc., gender. We talk about, different quality skills that we're good at. And then you have a minute to kind of express that. And so, that has been really successful and really empowering as well. And students love that. And then they learn a lot about each other as well through that. The far picture on the right is a project which works with a device called a Makey Makey, where students are programming. And what we did is again, so much creativity coming out. They had to design an instrument for somebody who has a disability. And in one school, we did it for how would you create an instrument for somebody, for a school community that does not have access to musical instruments, traditional music instruments. And so it doesn't have to look like a traditional instrument. And this is where your personalities can come out. And it's just, again, a lot of collaboration, a lot of thinking, a lot of problem solving. And sometimes through these unique experiences, students find out that, hey, I can really do this. Sometimes the limiting belief too with middle schoolers comes from, trying to get a grade. So I don't want to take a risk because I'm so pigeonholed and I really want to get that A. And so trying to value, I think, process and not just product, and saying, well, I'm going to evaluate you on, like, if it fails, like, all the stuff you did to try, to me, is so much more important and not just the product, right? So it's a mind shift. The middle one, again, coding, I think is a great way to be creative, because you can combine so many different mediums and so many different ways of expressing who you are. The lower one was pretty cool. We studied grade 6 biodiversity and human interactions, and we studied an oil spill. And so then they had to show the different connectivities of how the oil spill affected different species on the earth through coding. Again, kind of a different medium, and it doesn't have to be coding, which is why we have the example on the far left, which is a no tech kind of design challenge. I love working with non-tech as well, giving them, projects where they collaborate, work together, and using the design thinking process as well to problem solve. And so that was, 15 pieces of spaghetti, 10 marshmallows, build a skyscraper. Then we took it outside on a really windy day to test it out and see what they did. So I think, creativity can come in many, many different forms. It's not just, sometimes we're all creative. We've all, it's a skill that can be developed, and it's also a skill that needs to be practiced. And in terms of some of the problems that we're solving, whether it's climate change or racism, et cetera, I feel like creativity is really going to help us to think outside the box and address some of the larger issues. So providing those experiences to students at this age is so critical, especially middle school, but at any age really. And as adults, we have to catch ourselves when we say, like, we can't do something yet, and just, go for it. And I know we're going to talk about it later on about the, failure is, I always say, first attempt in learning. It's okay to fail.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I think we talked about this a little last night, but how, especially in pandemic times, we certainly have all had our own, kind of snafus and missteps and that sort of thing. And that, to that end, I'd like to address my next question to you, Tina, regarding barriers in creativity. We talked a little bit about limiting beliefs, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that and what you could share.
Yeah, I'm excited to share. Vicki, you nailed it right on the head when you talked about failing and giving students opportunities to do so, and not feeling like they haven't been successful just because their project hasn't failed. That's one of the things I plan to hit on. I think we can either cultivate creativity or crush creativity in our classrooms. We have the power to do both as teachers. So 3 of the points I really want to make is, how can we get our students to be creative, move from consuming content, from consumption, move towards creation. The second thing I really want to hit on is what Vicki mentioned as well, failing forward. How can we as teachers showcase that it is okay to make failures and then turn that into a learning opportunity? And then the last thing that I want to go over is how can we scaffold our students' success by giving them different choices. So I guess to move on to the next slide, our students can move from consumption to creation in a lot of different ways. And here are just two very basic examples. If we're thinking to how students consume content, there are multiple means of content consumption today, especially when it comes to technology. And of course, virtual reality is one of those things that we hear is this like innovative way that students can consume virtual reality field trips and 360 photos. And if you're lucky enough to have one of those really expensive, awesome VR headsets in your classroom, a little bit more immersive, that it's an amazing experience. And I'm definitely encouraging us to use those. But let's take it to the next level. Our students are able to create these experiences. Can you imagine the investment and the engagement that students might have if we give them the opportunity to move from consuming it to creating it? So I have two examples here. One is using a platform where students can design with kind of like cartoon-ish looking characters. It's a little Minecraft looking as well. My students log in with their Office 365 Microsoft accounts. I created a teacher account and they were able to create a virtual reality book report on a cube. I worked with an 8th grade teacher doing a novel study with this activity. He was teaching a book called The Pearl, and he wanted a way to get his students invested in the content of this book and to create a final product showcasing their knowledge of the novel. And so what this video actually shows is this cube virtual reality model of a book report. The students were able to choose different scenes from the book and create this virtual reality interactive moving scene. And he actually said to me, where has this been? Why haven't I had this, to use in my classroom before? I didn't know that this existed. And we were able to get students who formerly weren't really engaged in novel studies, invested in this content. And so now this was something he was able to take and continue to use at various times with other stories he's teaching. The other one is something I think we've all heard of, Minecraft Education Edition. This is something that our students are using. Our students are using it outside of the classroom, right? They're engaged, they're building, they're invested. They'll spend hours. I know my own child will spend hours building in Minecraft, but why can't, let's use that in the classroom. Let's bring that into our classrooms and apply it to the standards that we are teaching. So the example here is a video of a statewide actually contest that we developed with West Virginia history. So we asked students to create a historical event or location in West Virginia. And just to kind of spark curiosity in the classroom, we created this contest. And so this particular example is a student who created 3 or 4 buildings from WVU, and then did a voiceover and explained the history of these buildings and when they were built and some of the facts behind them. For this, we had scenes from the Civil War built. So you can see there's multiple opportunities to use virtual reality, not just to consume, but also to create. So that's my first opportunity to cultivate creativity. And the next one is failing forward. So we can showcase our students that it is okay to try something, it not work, and try again. That is actually the learning process. Students are looking for us to be these knowledge holders. They think that, they come to us and they expect us to know all the answers. And I think sometimes we feel like we should know all the answers. And so, take a step back, look at this from a student's perspective and see that they need us to model that we don't know all the answers. They need us to be vulnerable, transparent, showcase to them, we need support too. The learning process includes failure, and failure then is how we learn. So one of the ways that I like to teach this process with students and my own self is through coding. Coding is something that students can build that perseverance of failing forward, trying their code, running it, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, trying again. And I claim for myself that this is something I want to showcase to students. I'm not an expert in coding. I might be a technology coach, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert in coding. As educators in any subject level, when we go to college, yes, of course, we understand the importance of coding. We might have had a course that taught us that in college, but we're not coders in our curriculum. And so using this opportunity to show students how to fail forward, I think is a great example. I bring that up right now because it is CS in Education Week too. And of course, you can use, Minecraft Make Code, go to code.org. And if you don't have that Minecraft Education edition set up, you can use the Minecraft Hour of Code tutorials with your students and give them a little taste of what that's like. But I think coding is a great way to showcase that idea of failing forward and doing it together as a class. And then the last point is being able to give our students choice and opportunities to be creative, scaffolding that success. As an elementary teacher, I felt like when my third graders would come to me, I would give them a STEM activity and I would say, here are your materials. Your end result should be a bridge. Your end result should be a tower. You have the choice to make it however you see fit. And, my third graders would say, but what are the steps? How do I do this? What are the directions? They're used to us as teachers. Some of them are used to us giving them the step by step. So giving them a little bit of support is really important by creating a rubric. By the end, it should be this many centimeters tall or this many centimeters wide. It should have certain parameters to it. That helps them to understand the end goal, but it also allows that creativity and gives them some parameters set in the beginning. Choice boards are another great way. This is just a basic novel choice board where students can use opportunities to show their knowledge of the novel again, offline and online, and scaffolding that, like really detailed tech, low tech, and no tech is really important too, to give them the opportunities to show their knowledge of that novel in the way that they feel the most comfortable. And that's how they'll be the most creative. I think when we give students more autonomy and we add that creativity piece, then we're going to have invested students. And when you have invested students, you have engaged students, and then that's where you see student achievement.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting. I see all this activity in the chat, and I think it's all landing really well because we see this engagement. I think that's the real critical step. So I think that we all know an engaged classroom is is active, people are learning. I'm actually going to shift a little bit. And I think each of you have touched on this in your own, kind of focus, but Amanda, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about how you stay creative in your own work. We're obviously at a challenging point in the year, we'll say. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you stay, focused and engaged with what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's lots of things that have happened in the past 2 years, and teaching and learning has changed, and all of us have had to adapt in some way. But one of the things that I always come back to and rely on are the 4 C's in 21st century learning. And these elements are essential for an innovative world. You can see creativity is one of the elements, and all of these areas and skills really contribute to each other. So we have collaboration, creativity, communication, and critical thinking. So the biggest thing that I like to do is use these skills in the classroom with my students, which now I'm in a different role. So I help teachers use these skills in their classrooms. But what that does is it actually ignites your own creativity as well. Because when you see the kids passionate about learning, it really gets you passionate as well. So one of the ways you can do this is through different tools in your classroom and different digital tools. Also, like we said previously, offline tools as well. So these are just some ideas, but the big point is allowing your students to practice these skills in different ways. And in the chat I've been reading, a lot of it is about the process, and that's what we really want to encourage. So with collaboration, there's lots of tools that allow students to work together. One of the big things I like doing for collaboration is projects or inquiry-based learning, where students really get to go through that problem-solving process together. And those are just some tools that help that there. Padlet is a good one to use, like discussion boards and really engaging with each other. Creativity, that's something that really is embedded into everything. But one of the big things that I use to really ignite creativity is digital storytelling tools. So on the screen here, you'll just see some examples. These are just a few. There's tons out there. And again, they all are interchangeable into each of those different skills. So with communication, I love doing podcasting with students to really encourage that. Speaking of my own creativity, I also did podcasting, and it really helped me get creative in my work as well. And it helped me teach my students too. And then obviously Teams is one of those tools that you can use across the board with all of these different skills. It really ignites all of those things. And then critical thinking is an important one. Coding is a great one that was already mentioned. There's lots of offline things you can do as well. And also reflection is another big piece of that critical thinking. So there are a few reflection tools there that you can use with your students as well. So those are just some examples, some images, but there's lots out there that you can use with your students. And the impact that it has is not only with your classroom, but it really is connecting to your own personal lives as well, and community. And that's what it really does, is the 4 C's bring community and connection. And that's really what we want. If you think about the best moments in your life, it really does include other people. We really want to encourage that with our students, and that's how creativity really ignites. One of the ways that I develop my creativity and develop community is through something called a community of practice. That's what we do here in my school division. And we allow people to meet with like-minded educators who all have the same purpose and goal. And it's not someone talking at someone else. It's not about that. It's about everyone working together to just share ideas, to lean on one another, and to develop that creativity. And that's really how I stay creative in my own work, is by collaborating with other educators, other teachers, other people who want to do this work as well. So a community of practice is really beneficial. One of the first ones I was ever in was a technology community of practice. And that really is what was a springboard for me to try all these different tools in my classroom, and has led me to where I am today. One of the big things that we also need to remember in all of this is that globally, we are going through a challenging time right now. And burnout is something that we're really seeing right now, as was mentioned, especially this time of year. So burnout is real, and it's real for our students. And burnout can really stifle that creativity in all of us. So we need to find ways to really move past that burnout and just rely on each other to cultivate that creativity again. So one of the books that I'm going to reference here is something that I'm reading. There's a group of us reading it. I guess you could call it a community of practice. It's called The Rebound. You can't see it with my virtual screen, but it's on the screen there. So The Rebound was published in the pandemic as a response to kind of what's happening. And the whole idea is how we don't want our schools to go back to business. We don't want that idea. We want this idea of, okay, what's the next normal? But in a sense of how can we reframe our classrooms and education as a whole? Because that's what's necessary. We don't want to go back to how it was. We want to get more creative. We want to learn from what's happened and from all the tools that we've been able to use in the pandemic. So in this book, they reference different stages in this process of getting back to that creativity. So the first stage is that resolve. It's just giving yourself permission to mourn what's gone and just move forward. It's okay to feel upset and frustrated. And also let's look at what we can do. The next stage is relief and resilience. So we learn how to cope with the struggles going on in our workplace, in our own personal lives. And we learn how to rely on each other. So that's that community piece. And we also need to learn how to improve schools and education. The next stage is that return and reopen. And that's what we've been experiencing this year, especially. We've seen education open up again, but in different ways. We've seen distance learning, we've seen hybrid, we've seen remote, blended, in person. There's all these different ways that schooling is happening, but it allows us to reimagine our classrooms. And that's what really is that next step there, is when we acknowledge what has happened, we're willing to move forward and reimagine our classrooms. And the biggest piece there is at the end, and that's that redefine and reinvent. And I love that reinvent word, because it is really what this whole session is about. It's what Digital Promise is about. It's reinventing the classroom so that we can have a better future for our students, and that we can have that passion again as well. So that redefine and reinvent is really about reinventing those learning experiences, but it's also taking action so that our learning experiences are equitable and accessible for all students. We need to make sure that's a big piece of that, because we need that reinvention for every student. And we want everyone to be included in that so that we can ignite that creativity for all of us. Yes, I just saw in the chat, reinvent the classroom. Yeah.
It's really great because and it's funny, as in preparing for this evening, I saw a lot of discussion on invention versus innovation and creativity. So I think that's just really kind of, it's absolutely worth putting that fine point on it. So thank you. Oh, Brent, that's a great point in the chat as well. If you want to speak on that a little bit more. Past 2 years, a lot of teachers, buildings, and districts.
Mm-hmm. That's been really cool. Just having this opportunity to where we say, hey, our education system is getting completely just almost demolished in a sense. It's going from in building to completely online, and we need to adapt. And it just really is fun having that opportunity to be like, okay, how are we going to adapt this? How are we going to make this a better experience, not only for when they're online, but when we come back in classroom, which we are now. How can we make this a better experience for everyone? How can we build better communities in our classrooms, in our buildings? How can we meet the needs of our students? Since now we're having all this technology, we have all these new things we've been trying. And if it failed, then we're like, oh, well, it's pandemic time and we tried. And we're like, okay, but we tried. But even with that trying, we're learning things and we're growing, and we're finding things that are working for students that may have been unreached before, students that have been disengaged from our classrooms in the past. We're seeing them engage in new ways in our classroom. And all that was from having this opportunity to, that freedom to try something and having that support from admin, from district level to say, try something because we don't know what to do.
No, that's a good, you raised a good question there. I'd love to hear from the other panelists. Brent, it sounds like you feel like you have a certain amount of freedom and with creativity, which sounds amazing. I'd love to hear from other folks how they're coming up against, the other stakeholders in the process.
I think that, oh, sorry, Vicki. I think that teachers also feel empowered to break their own molds of creativity. They're breaking their own barriers to creativity, where the barriers that I feel like they created on their own. The fear of tech, that barrier of I don't know how to use this technology. I'm not good with technology. They had to break that mold and that fear. We really didn't have an option. And so I think that teachers now feel empowered. They feel excited that, they are okay with that idea of trying and failing, because that's what we had to do for about a year and a half, was try different platforms, see what works for our students. And so that whole idea of failing forward kind of happened by default. And so our teachers now who were formerly, maybe not using technology in the most creative ways, are now not afraid to try new things and know if it doesn't work, we're going to throw that out. We're going to try something new, because they've, been thrown into that world. So I feel like a lot of the educators that maybe wouldn't have done a lot of things that they're doing today are now risk taking, even still, now that we're back in the classroom because of it.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what Tina said, that, you've been forced to be creative, right? Because we were put in positions that, we weren't prepared for. This is not something that you went to school and learned how to do. And so you had to be creative to problem solve. So we've seen things like, people teaching music and having songs come together in Zoom little boxes, and, even use the platforms that exist and the technology that exists in ways that were not originally meant to, and reimagined. And we're still seeing that. And so, that in itself, if you think about it, how creative educators have become and how they've responded to what has happened in the last 2.5 years. I mean, it really shows the creativity of educators globally, right? So yeah, I agree with everything you said, Tina.
When I mentioned that idea of how creative educators are, because I was just thinking about this today as I was kind of trying to fine tune some pieces of things to talk about, and I was like, education is a very creative career. Like, if you're not someone who's very creative, then it's hard to do a really good job. I think that's something that people underestimate educators, is how creative it takes, how creative you need to be in order to be an educator and to do it well.
Yeah, I agree with that, Brent. Another piece to that too is that creativity level also helps with that engagement piece. And one thing that is evident is the pandemic has really affected that with students. But I think you're right. Teachers have this opportunity to use their creativity to enhance learning and engage students. And in the classroom, students can also get creative in new ways, which it's really cool that we can use something that was so hard for everyone and move forward in these new ways that we wouldn't have seen as possible 2 years ago. It just really accelerated that creativity and learning, even though we had to go through this process.
We actually have a question in the Q&A that's, I think, adds an extra dimension to this. And in the meantime, I'll ask if anybody else has any other questions, do feel free to add them to the Q&A. But Theodore asks if you find it difficult to communicate with technology staff to help purchase, implement, or get technology in place. And I'll pass over to the panelists, even knowing that we have some technology folks with us today. Thank you.
So
I can jump in there and answer that one. As a tech coach, could you repeat the question again? Because I couldn't locate it in the chat.
Oh, sure thing. It's in the Q&A. It's, do you find it difficult to communicate with technology staff to help purchase or implement or get technology in place? And I think it could even be beyond technology. Perhaps there's a bigger question to leadership, perhaps.
So being a technology coach, and I'm in that position, I'm often, when I'm out in the schools, I'm asked, inundated. I'm going down the hallway and teachers are like, hey, when is this coming? Hey, can we get this? What do you think about this? Can you pass this on to the purchasing powers, that kind of thing. And I love taking teachers' feedback on programs or their needs. That's, one of my jobs as a tech coach is collaborating with teachers and finding out, what are their needs in the classroom. And that comes with equipment as well. But I do see the perspective from the educator side where there are certain needs in place. And it's like, when we need something in our classroom, we need it today. We don't need it in like 3 months. We need it right now. And it's just so hard working on, I think that there's an element of that process that maybe, and I've been in the classroom, that I didn't understand before, that there's a lot of ducks that need to be in a row before those purchases can be made. Acquiring the funding, and then if it's wherever that funding is coming from, writing whatever needs to be written to make sure that that funding is dispersed the correct way, and that the purchases are aligned with how that funding is designated. So there's a lot of back work that needs to happen when it comes to making those purchases and those needs. And so being in this position now out of the classroom and kind of like the middleman, I'm able to see, both sides of how that works. And better able to communicate that in this position back to teachers, like, hey, you are being heard. Our tech department and our admin, do hear and understand and want to make this happen. It's just that there's a process, and it makes it seem on the other end, when you're not sure what that process is, that maybe those things aren't being heard.
I'm in a similar position to you, Tina, where I'm kind of like the middle person. But to speak more to the implementation, one of the great things, I'm in a very big district, one of the bigger districts in the province. And what I've seen that's been really successful, and an example was today, was even though I'm not a part of the tech team per se, I think we're all becoming tech staff in some way if you're a teacher, and especially if you're helping teachers, they're like, help me with everything. But the implementation, I saw this today that the tech team did this, and it was fabulous. They've been doing Hour of Codes where it's live stream in Microsoft Teams, and so all these classes can join. And what's beautiful about that is usually traditionally the way we implement tech has been teachers come to an in-service, right? And it's hard to get those days, for supply, and you got to make supply plans, and it's costly. But, again, through a pandemic, what's happened, everybody is up on an LMS system. And so through Teams, all these classes can join from over, let's say 250 schools. Of course, there's somewhat of a limit, but we had, I'd say 150 classes or whatnot on there, engaging with the lessons today, coding. The students are getting the PD, but so is the teacher at the same time. So that's been really effective. And then years ago, I had a Minecraft club at my school, but it was run by students for teachers. And this was, again, a shift in power, super cool. And the reason I did that was I don't play Minecraft well. I wish I did. I wish I knew the program. I'm learning and I'm getting better, but my students are far superior to me. So why would I be the one that is showing teachers how to use it, right? I can show them how to make those curriculum connections. That's my forte. But it was the students. And so, it was students who were interested, and these were students who didn't maybe stand out in certain ways. So it was a real shift in power. So again, thinking about, and there's a conference that we've planned now for a couple of years. And again, it's been student-led conferences, student-led conference for students and teachers. So the students actually lead the workshop. So I think that's a really powerful way, again, kind of shifting the power and seeing us, we're all learners. Everybody has something that they can teach us. So that's been really good at kind of, we need to, I think about how we teach and do technology and how we implement it in more creative ways.
I'll add on to that, Vicki. I kind of am in a similar position. I would say another important piece that not everyone thinks about is that digital security piece and digital privacy for students that we really need to be aware of. So the biggest thing is just not getting to the point where we just want to buy technology or get all of these programs for kids and just give it to them because it's technology. We want it to be purposeful, and we want it to have intent. And we also want to make sure that our kids are safe when they're using it as well. So I think that is an important piece of that process, where not everyone recognizes why maybe it's a longer process or a bit more difficult to get certain things. But it's really important to have that at your forefront, because really we need to protect our kids and make sure what they're doing really is purposeful.
I think that's a great point, Amanda. And I am glad you brought that up, because I was thinking, I think it struck me yesterday when we were having a similar conversation, is being in Canada, what that looks like is a little bit different from us in the US. So I don't know, I don't expect you to be an expert, obviously, on international data privacy, but I think that that's something that's absolutely worth considering, and sort of how we talk about this as a broader group.
Yeah, absolutely. In Canada, I mean, in Saskatchewan specifically, we are really careful about where student information is stored, who can access that information, how secure something is. So we are very cognizant of that. And I think for good reason. And I think that is a good standard to have. But it does really, like, coming back to this creativity piece, it allows you to not lean on the tool itself, but to lean on why you're using that tool. So really to produce creativity in different ways. And it also brings out that collaborative and community piece, because you are working together for that same goal and working together to share ideas of, maybe one teacher is doing something in their classroom and another teacher doesn't know about it. They can share that idea and move forward together. So it does have opportunity for doing some really creative things. Just remembering those important pieces in this process is really valuable.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, now I absolutely invite certainly folks in the who've called in to submit anything else they have. And panelists, do you have any other questions or things that you'd like to learn from each other? This is again, our conversations have been so informative to me, and I think I hope that you found value in them as well. But if there's anything else, this would be a great time to learn and share with the rest of the group.
I'll just touch on what Theodore said in the chat. I thought that was a really important point. The free period of the pandemic threw a wrench in a lot of that. I think that's a really important piece. When that first happened, everyone was putting everything up for free, and people were just downloading anything they could to make learning easier. And something that we really need to remember is the educational piece of that as well, and the innovative piece isn't there without the purpose. So that was a really good point, Theodore. So thanks for pointing that out, because it has been a learning process, and I think it's taught a lot of people things and just how to do things safely and intently. So that was a good point. Thanks, Theodore, for pointing that out.
I will add to that too, Amanda, that while teachers were breaking out of their shells and trying all these new things and, being more creative with technology, who, formerly hadn't, I felt like as a technology coach, we were working towards learning best practices and purposeful technology integration and doing things in mindful steps. And then everything was just thrown at us, and we had to figure it out. And teachers were at home, and we were trying to have meetings online and trying to figure that all out. So I definitely applaud our teachers for trying anything and everything that they could to make it happen, make it see what works. But now we're in a position where and we weren't able to be proactive with the pandemic because we didn't have time to be proactive. I think we had like 5 days or something before everything shut down for good. Now we're being instead of being proactive, we're being retroactive, and we kind of have to be. We're taking it back a lot of steps, and it's kind of like you adopt a dog, and it's learned all these like bad behaviors. And it's learned all these things that you want to like retrain it. And so I'm trying to retrain my brain on pulling it back. Like, we've been using all this stuff. Now let's pull it back. I've got to look at, what are we using that's purposeful? What are we using that makes sense to keep? What are we using that's working for students and teachers? And so for me, I have to, do a second training for my own self. And I feel like with our teachers, they're doing the same thing. They're looking at with a fine tune, what works and what doesn't. So instead of having the opportunity to be proactive, yes, we're actually pulling back and being retroactive, but in a good way, in a purposeful way, to determine what we're going to continue to use in our classrooms.
That's great. And I love that. Yes, personal accessible means that, we're being patient and generous with our talents too. I think that's a great point, Amanda. We did get another question in the Q&A. Do any of you work with media specialists with integrating or implementing technology, as the traditional librarian duties have changed so much since technology has become such a big part of libraries? If so, we'd like to know how you worked with those media specialists.
So I have, in my role, we have most of our teacher librarians are half-time, and they're also doing planning time, and they're also, a lot of them are creating maker spaces. So I'm not sure if this was where the question was going. But you know, part of my role, that really key piece of that teacher librarian is so powerful in getting other educators to work with technology and to just try out new things, because they connect with the entire school. So I have seen libraries transitioning from more traditional spaces to more community spaces. And even at our community level, our local library has maker spaces and has, you know, sewing classes I've taken, and robotics, and Minecraft clubs, and all kinds of really cool opportunities, which have mostly gone online at the moment. Yeah, I will often co-plan or co-work with them, and also encourage, if you are in that role, to find who the people are to build capacity within your school, and kind of encourage them to take the lead, so that you're not doing all of the leadership work yourself. So when you notice somebody has a talent or an interest in a certain area, have them try to build that capacity, make note of it. Sometimes people just need a little of a push. They don't think what they're doing is so exciting, but it often really is awesome. And so just hearing that from someone in that little bit of a push, it can be a really good way to build capacity. But that is an amazing role if you know, that integration technology, that specialist, that makerspace librarian, because you have the ability to really like, especially with blending literacy. I mean, literacy is so great. Taking a book and then building a whole learning experience around it at any age can be so powerful. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's the way I took it.
I know for our building, we had disintegrated the media specialist role, that librarian roles, where we have someone comes in for like an hour a day just to make sure books are being put back. But beyond that, as we got our new spaces that we actually got a brand new building this year. It was pretty bad before, but we got a brand new building, and we made sure that we had at least one teacher in each little neighborhood, where we have 5 or 6 teachers that can be kind of the lead in a sense for technology, and don't help teachers that maybe need support with that. But we've taken on a charge as a building that every teacher is being responsible for all those different technology pieces, make sure they're integrating all those software skills into the classroom, and those technology needs into their lessons. And so we're all taking on little parts of that role.
Brent, I'm going to go ahead and add to that. I was in one of those dissolved roles last year, and the position was dissolved after I had moved into the technology coach position, which I still am able to serve that particular school and other schools in our county as well. But more often than not, in our state, and I guess locality in general, a lot of those positions are being dissolved. And those duties are kind of being spread out amongst the teams, amongst maybe certain technology team leaders, as you're stating as well. And so I guess what I want to know from you, Brent, and anybody else who's seen this happen or has been in a district that this has happened, you know, what are the positives of that, or what are some of the problems that have come from those positions being eliminated?
One of the positives from it has been that students know they can go to any teacher for support if they're trying to work on something. So they're doing a PowerPoint and a math classes because they're trying to show their understanding on how to find the area of composite figures. Great. If they're trying to do a write-up on something, they know they can come to me, they can come to the English teacher, they can go to a science teacher, social studies teacher, anybody for support. But the downside has been, I don't have extra time in my day to fully support the teacher that's struggling in the classroom with implementing that. And so like I have an English teacher in my neighborhood that needs a lot of support with it, and I can offer some time before school, after school, my prep time, but I can't go do a half day with them to help them get something started in their classroom, or a full day with them to get something started in their classroom. I can be like, hey, here's some tools. good luck. Let me know how it goes at the end. So that's one part, not having that full support for those teachers that need that extra support.
I think that's a great point. And I think to kind of I had a follow-up question that kind of occurred to me as we were talking is then also, how do you capture all that you're doing? How do you capture these lessons learned and make note of what's working and what feels good and what feels right to teachers? Certainly we all have our own, kind of reflections of experiences, but how do we make that, how do we make it something we learn from and grow from moving forward? Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can begin to kind of transition. Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm going to pass it back to Stephanie. I would like to thank our panelists again. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and for your continued work, both in the classroom, alongside teachers as well. Just a really, I really personally enjoyed learning from you and look forward to sharing this webinar with the rest of the folks. So thank you, Stephanie, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thanks to everyone for joining this evening. Thank you to our panelists. I have really appreciated all of the examples from the classrooms, and especially the connections to coding, to social emotional learning, to data privacy. I really enjoyed how this conversation kind of went in places that I didn't expect it to go when we first logged on this evening, in terms of thinking about creativity and the implications for the classroom. And I've also really appreciated everyone's engagement in the chat. I can't wait to download it and reread that. Before we go, though, we want to share a few micro-credentials that align with social emotional learning and that align with creativity. So micro-credentials provide educators with recognition for the skills that they develop throughout their careers, regardless of where or how they learn them. And Stanley has dropped the link to our micro-credentials site in the chat if you're interested in continuing your professional learning in that way. And we also invite you to keep this conversation going with us by following us on Twitter at #ReinventTheClassroom, where we hope you will connect with our presenters and other HP Teaching Fellows as we continue to share more ideas about creating powerful learning experiences. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. Really appreciate it, and have a great and safe and happy holiday.